Joseph had come a long way from his father's house. Once the beloved son of Jacob, he was now a slave in Egypt. Betrayed by his own brothers and sold into the hands of strangers, he had every reason to be bitter. He had every reason to give up. But Joseph was not like other men. His faith in God remained strong, even in the darkest moments of his life. Instead of allowing his suffering to make him resentful, Joseph chose to walk in integrity. He refused to be defined by what had been done to him, and because of this, God was with him. In Egypt he was bought by Potiphar, a high-ranking officer in Pharaoh's court, and placed in his household as a servant. But Joseph was no ordinary servant. Everything he touched prospered. It didn't take long for Potiphar to realize that this young Hebrew had something special. He saw that Joseph was wise, hard-working, and above all trustworthy. Over time, Potiphar placed Joseph in charge of everything in his house. He managed the food, the fields, the wealth, and the household affairs. Potiphar trusted Joseph so much that he didn't even worry about what was going on under his own roof. Everything was in Joseph's hands. But there was someone else in the house who had also taken notice of him: Potiphar's wife. Joseph was young, strong, and handsome, and Potiphar's wife, bored with her life of luxury and power, began to desire him. At first it was just lingering glances, then it became words. She found reasons to be near him, spoke to him in soft, enticing tones, and finally, one day, she said plainly, "Come and lie with me." Joseph froze. This was his master's wife. He had been entrusted with everything in the household, but this was something forbidden. His heart pounded, but he did not hesitate in his response. "My master has entrusted me with everything in this house. He has kept nothing from me, except you, because you are his wife. How could I do such a wicked thing and sin against God?" This was not just about loyalty to Potiphar, it was about loyalty to God. But she did not stop. Day after day she tried to seduce him. Whenever she saw him, she spoke words meant to weaken his resolve. She told him no one would ever know. She told him he was only denying himself pleasure. She told him he was still a slave. Why should he refuse the only good thing in his life? Joseph was in a dangerous situation, not just because Potiphar's wife was persistent, but because temptation grows stronger the longer it lingers. He could have entertained her words. He could have allowed his mind to wander. He could have told himself that, as a slave, he had no real control over his life anyway. But Joseph did something most people fail to do. He stayed far from temptation. He never stayed alone in the same room with her. He avoided unnecessary conversation. He did not engage, not even a little. He knew that sin often starts as a small whisper before it becomes a roaring fire. But Potiphar's wife was not used to being denied. One day, when the house was empty, she found her chance. Joseph was inside, attending to his work, when suddenly she appeared before him. This time, she did not speak, she acted. She grabbed him by his cloak and pulled him close. "Come to me," she said. At that moment, Joseph had a choice. Some men would have hesitated. Some would have entertained the idea. Some would have given in, believing that no one would ever know. But Joseph did not hesitate. He ran. He pulled away with such force that his cloak was left in her hands. He did not stop to explain. He did not look back. He fled from the house as fast as he could. This is a powerful lesson. Some temptations are not meant to be fought. They are meant to be fled. Joseph could have reasoned with her. He could have stayed to argue. But he knew the truth. The longer you stay near sin, the stronger its grip becomes. Potiphar's wife, humiliated by his rejection, turned her desire into fury. Looking at Joseph's cloak in her hands, she screamed. When the other servants came running, she twisted the story, claiming that Joseph had attacked her, and when she screamed, he had fled in fear. When Potiphar returned home, he was enraged. Without question, he ordered Joseph to be thrown into prison. Joseph had done the right thing. He had resisted temptation. He had remained faithful to God. And yet, he still suffered for it. This is the reality of life. Sometimes choosing what is right will cost you something. It would have been easy for Joseph to ask, "Why, God? Why am I being punished for doing what was right?" But God had not abandoned him. Even in prison, Joseph found favor. And though it seemed like everything was falling apart, God was preparing him for something greater. Years later, Joseph would rise to become the second most powerful man in Egypt. He would be placed in a position to save countless lives during a great famine, including his own family, the very brothers who had betrayed him. Had he fallen into sin with Potiphar's wife, his story could have ended in disgrace. But because he remained faithful, God honored him beyond anything he could have imagined. What can we learn from Joseph's story? Lust is persistent. Resisting it once is not enough. Potiphar's wife did not tempt Joseph just once. She pursued him daily. Sin often works this way. It does not always strike in a single moment. It wears you down over time. Don't stand near temptation. Flee from it. Joseph didn't just say no. He avoided her altogether. He refused to even be around her. He didn't see how strong he could be in the face of temptation. He ran from it. 1 Corinthians 6:18 says, "Flee from sexual immorality." It does not say to argue with it. It does not say to test yourself. It says to flee. Even when doing right brings suffering, trust God. Joseph was punished for doing the right thing, but his story was far from over. God used his trial to bring him to a greater purpose. Sometimes standing for righteousness costs us something, but in the end, it will be worth it. Lust offers temporary pleasure, but long-term destruction. If Joseph had given in, the moment of pleasure would have been short, but the consequences would have been lifelong. Sin always takes more than it gives. Joseph's story is a reminder that we all face moments of temptation, but we have a choice. We can entertain it, or we can run from it. And in the end, those who remain faithful to God will never be forgotten. Joseph's reward was greater than he could have imagined. So when temptation comes knocking, what will you choose?